my name is Dave Reske, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we tell stories of rapidly scaling businesses that leverage the best in digital marketing. My guest today is Marina Erulkar. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Marina.
Erulkar, and thank you for asking.
Oh, yes. And you work with executives to help grow their companies. Through your company, Hampstead Solutions, you serve clients across all growth phases of industries ranging from technology, financial services, professional services, and healthcare. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Looking forward to our conversation.
That's great to have you here. So we're here to talk about stories of scaling and talk about some of your experiences in helping businesses scale. And I first want to just talk about this idea of scaling a business. So what do you think about, what's the difference between your work in when you think about scaling a business versus just helping a business solve problems or deal with other issues? What are you specifically thinking about when it comes to scaling?
Well, specifically when a company's objective is to grow and scale the company, among the things that I consider is focus and efficiency, and the two have to occur together. Focus factors internal and external considerations. Internally, it would include finances and operations, practices, programs. Externally, it would include, appreciating customers, their needs, how to engage and then motivate them throughout the customer life cycle, throughout their journeys. And it would also include a consideration of the marketplace and competitive environments, and all of that intelligence should result in focus, meaning what the company can do in order to drive the success that they intend. And then efficiency comes in, whether it's automation or digitization or aligning team members with their highest and best use, to ensure that there is a smooth and, again, efficient progression through the activities that have been defined in the strategy and in the tactics to achieve the company's objectives.
So it sounds like you're saying you need both focus and efficiency in order to scale a rapidly growing business. Why do you think it's so hard for companies to focus? Let's start with the focus period first, because I think it's easier to think about like efficiency, cost savings is a natural part of many business operations. But the focus seems like it's difficult because why? So why do you think that is in your experience?
It absolutely is difficult, and for good reason, because the information, the intelligence that's required comes from across the organization. And particularly in companies where there are siloed groups or divisions, there may be a sharing of information, but not necessarily to the depth that's required in order to create an understanding of where to focus. And that is why my work cuts across organizations very intentionally. And I think the other insight that I would offer, David, beyond getting through the complexity of all of the different types of information, because it can be qualitative and quantitative, that informs focus. The other insight I would offer is that there's a discipline involved, and there are risks associated with that discipline.
Mm.
So if a company, for example, believes that their intelligence is indicating that they should focus on A and not B, it can be risky and scary to omit B from their activities, particularly if, B is associated with past success, with what they've always done, with, groups who are very committed to it, any number of other factors. But, it's among the reasons why creating a very compelling business case for choosing A and omitting B is part of the work that I do, so that there is confidence associated with that focus moving forward.
So let's just take an example of that. Let's say a client is considering focusing on a specific vertical industry to the exclusion of others because they want to be experts there and known there. And let's say they're considering their experience in financial services and healthcare and manufacturing, to use three broad areas. Are you saying that, it can be dangerous to or risky to say we're going to put all our eggs in the financial services basket? We have some great clients in manufacturing. We've done a lot in healthcare too, but just, more of our work has been in financial services. So we're going to go all in there, and there's some risk associated with that. How do you think about like the business case, the risks, of a decision like that?
Sure. And it's work that I do fairly frequently with my clients because, to your point, those decisions should be very well informed and very considered and very deliberate, particularly in the scenario that you're describing. Because investing solely in one industry inherently comes with a set of risks. Those risks include the fortunes of that industry are suddenly tied to the company, right? As that industry rises and falls, so does that company's fortunes. So, when I am advising a company about its industry focus, I would look at, the scope of their options. And what I've done for clients in the past is essentially create a scorecard where we look at all of those industry options and measure and then grade those options based on a set of criteria that is relevant to that company. So, whether it's ease of entry or strength of relationships or regulatory considerations or the length of the sales cycle, whatever it may be, those factors are then weighed and considered along with projections about the revenue potential that is associated with each of those industries. And therefore, we can take a very sober and considered look at the options and therefore what should be chosen from among them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And having that detailed data and thoughtfully presented in a business case can sure be very helpful in making those decisions. What are the other focus decisions that you've helped companies wrestle with as they've gone to market, and try to produce that high scale result? Like, I think the industry, choice is super important, but are there other focus choices you've helped clients wrestle with?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's one that comes to mind for a technology company that had been wildly successful, and unfortunately, that success very suddenly and very inexplicably came to an end. And as they were in decline, one of the things that I realized was they had a marketing team who was creating increasingly more specialized content. But what they didn't have was any kind of marketing process or content that introduced the technology and took prospects through the standard series of information that would help them appreciate the value of the technology, how it could be used in their organizations, and more specifically, because it was a B2B sale, there were different decision makers associated with that decision. Those decision makers had different needs. They needed different information at different points in time. And so we had to cater to them too. And so, among the focus that was required of this company was focus on the needs of prospects early in their awareness and then move them very deliberately and very efficiently through their decision cycle. In the process, we have to weave together the understanding of these different decision makers such that they come to a unified purchase decision, the conclusion of this particular leg of the journey. And so the focus that came from that was, how do we select the information that we impart to drive demand? What do we then impart to help them, assess this technology from among the other options that they have? And then, again, just sort of threading this series of information, again, to those different decision makers at different points in time, such that they reach a purchase decision. And then, just sort of completing the thought in terms of scalability, automated these steps in the process, which had the added benefit of introducing measurability. And because this was a new practice, we needed to understand very quickly what was going well, where we needed to iterate. And so that measurement really shone a light on what we could augment and amplify and where we needed some additional attention for improvement.
Wow, it sounds very comprehensive to think of it that way. I can imagine that, maybe a small organization's doing all of those things, right? But maybe doing it with people in a one-off way. So maybe a really good salesperson might be able to ask questions to figure out where people are in the buying cycle, what that particular persona needs, right? You're talking to a financial buyer early in the buying process, maybe in a specific geography about this particular product A in their product suite, right? So a person does that. But what you're saying is in order to scale, you've got to think strategically about all of those phases of the buying cycle, all the needs of all the buyers in all the geographies and all of the different products that they've gone to market with, because otherwise you're relying on maybe one individual here and there to randomly or do it the best they can, but not at scale, right? You're talking about a process to think about that at scale.
That's exactly it. So rather than these pockets of success that are reliant on the expertise of one person, we we essentially, we essentially introduce methods of success across the organization. And one of the things you've reminded me, one of the things that made this program so successful was we partnered with the sales organization. And we got a very deep and detailed understanding of what they needed in order to consider a lead qualified. So what we were doing throughout the marketing cycle was developing intelligence about that opportunity such that a salesperson could say, yes, and yes, indeed, it's time for a conversation. I know what I need to know about this opportunity. I know something about the players. They were far better informed and therefore far further in the sales cycle than they had been traditionally. But the other point that I wanted to respond to, David, was, you mentioned small organizations, and that people are very often the solution. When there is a challenge or something new going on, even in standard processes. And this was one of the barriers to scaling in this organization, and in fairness, in a lot of the others that I've worked with, where they're still working in that startup early stage business model where people are the answer to all things. And that's very reasonable. That's very appropriate in those companies because they are learning and they may not have the budgets for, automation. They may not want to invest there. But at a certain point, it's time to introduce methods and standards and processes and practices and relieve those team members such that they are focused on their highest and best use and let digitization and automation do the heavy lifting where they're not required. And that was among the things that had to be introduced for this company.
Yeah, that's those are terrifically powerful insights. I want to kind of unpack each of those just in turn, but I love what you said about partnering with the sales team because you've got definitely a marketing function in this content strategy you talked about to create content at scale. But you also said like working directly with the salespeople. And imagine the salespeople they're doing this naturally all day long, right? So they're the ones who are doing it not at scale. They're doing it one at a time, right? And that's what's necessary for sales in many B2B organizations. But you're learning from them, then taking all that knowledge and taking that back. How long in that example did that take? Is that, hours, days, weeks, months to kind of get a sense of like everything that's going on with the salespeople, interviewing, learning, documenting, going back, assessing the content they've got, figuring out what the gaps are? Is that, weeks, months? I don't know. How long does that take?
Quite happily, the sales team was very hungry for these insights because otherwise they were working with their prospects from very early in the sales cycle, and it was painful and arduous and long and a very complex process. So, quite happily, we had the enthusiasm for the sales team. One of the things that this organization did, and we solved for in this process, was that we had a definition of marketing qualified leads that was entirely different from sales qualified leads. that created a gap, right? That created a gap where revenue leaked out of the organization. Because if marketing was developing a type of lead that they considered qualified, but it didn't satisfy sales definition of qualified, they would drop those prospects. That demand went somewhere, usually to competitors.
Mhm.
It, put confusion in the marketplace because the sales organization was replicating marketing's efforts to introduce products and services. And, that only created, additional effort that, had questionable results tied to it. So there was a real enthusiasm, a real hunger for solving this problem. And quite happily, bringing the groups together and sort of talking through objectives for what qualified looked like, and then coming up with a method such that we were scoring leads based on our unified understanding of lead qualification as they progressed through their journey, such that sales could say, this is now fully qualified according to our agreed definition. Or, we gave them the option through the information that was, shared through the sales platform. We gave them the option to engage sooner if there was something that was particularly interesting. But all that to say, we delivered better, more useful information to the sales team. We produced it very methodically through the marketing process, such that the groups were working in a very collaborative, very cohesive way.
Sounds like a really successful engagement. I love what you said about, in small organizations, often in startups, they think people are the answer. And then in large organizations, they really transition to understanding that people are important, but also they have systems and process to deliver consistency in order to scale up. What has to happen in your view, in your experience, for an organization to kind of make that transition, from that, we have to solve it with hiring more people, or, to becoming focused on the right systems and process, engaging someone like you to kind of figure out all of these things in order to help them scale the business?
Oh God, I think it can be tough to recognize. I think it takes a little bit of detachment and certainly some perspective. And what I've seen as sort of tells that it's time is when there are no processes, there are no standard practices. And I think what's more observable is that there are no sort of formal role definitions, which, as I observe it, results in a sort of flocking. So there's a crisis and people will flock to it. They'll
Hmm.
opt in and then opt out, which means that there is no, there's no sort of standard way of solving the same problem. It's solved, as if it's new again and again and again. There is no sort of enterprise knowledge. Um, it just creates a significant inefficiency among the reasons why focus becomes so important. That focus would include roles and responsibilities, and ensuring, of course, that they're cohesive and aligned. That is some of the work that I do. When I assess a company, which is always my first step, I'm looking for opportunities for growth. I'm looking for where revenue is leaking out of the organization. And among the sources of those leaks can be gaps and redundancies in processes, where there are redundant people in one spot, but a gap between others. And so, among the work that I do is aligning processes and aligning people across it where they are, again, contributing what's necessary and to their highest and best use.
Yeah, and that's a really powerful way of helping organization. Can you think of other examples of how you've helped organizations scale, or maybe organizations that were stuck in a mode where they weren't scaling properly, and the issues that they were wrestling with?
Well, I'll give you an example from a company that had been in business for about 10 years. It was a marketing services company. They delivered tremendous value to their clients. And that was due in large part to the dedication and the expertise of the founders of the company.
Mhm.
And, there were a number of challenges preventing them from growing and scaling in the process. But among the challenges was that everything that they did was directly reliant on the founders' expertise. The founders were involved in everything from, creating strategies to implementing those strategies to account management to business development. And frankly, they became bottlenecks in the organization and prevented the company from scaling. Oh, and by the way, they were exhausted and they had lost the joy that came with the work that, they really fundamentally loved. And so, solving this problem required sort of, again, introducing some processes. We productized some of the things that they delivered in a very routine way, such that different members of their organization who were hungry for more responsibility and had proven themselves worthy of that trust could sort of take ownership of different areas of the business and then lift the founders into the more executive roles that were appropriate. In the process, it also made it more special for clients to engage with the founders. And it was, really eroding their credibility when they were involved in everything, whether it was strategic or, solving putting out a fire on the weekends. And so, it had the added benefit of, again, raising their profile and making their contributions more appropriate, as they should.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a very powerful insight and huge service you did to that organization. And as a leader of a digital marketing agency myself, I see the same thing in as I've grown the business over 20 years. You go through these periods where you think you have to do everything, and you realize that all the people that are working for my company now speak, they all want to take responsibility. They want to demonstrate their competence. They want to do the great work. They only want me involved if I absolutely have to be there. And I love that. I love it's not just delegating, it's letting them lead. And that's a powerful transition for small companies to make. In large organizations, in your experience, do you see the same thing? Do you see department heads or managers who don't want to let go and are resistant to systems and processes? Or do you see large organizations, they're large because they have the systems and process in place and they already have all that. So people are always willing to let go. How do you see the difference?
I think it extends. I think that challenge extends to large organizations. I worked with an absolutely massive enterprise company, and they had a set of standards and practices that they had built and invested in over decades, and they had worked to a point. And that point was when there were new competitive entrants in the marketplace. And instead of the very laborious and the very extensive and the very lengthy planning process that they engaged in on a quarterly basis in a regular cadence, suddenly their market changed. They had to be very nimble. They had to be more outwardly looking instead of focusing on what they believed their customers wanted. Suddenly the market rather was giving them different information by way of response. And they very necessarily had to change. What I found was that there were certain members of that organization who were highly resistant, simply because there wasn't adequate data and there wasn't adequate motivation
Hmm.
to make the necessary changes. There were people who I just by way of, just by way of background, David, one of the things that I first did for them was quantify the impact of that change, which really underscored the fact that this was a company with a burning platform, and we had to act very quickly. There were people in the organization who rejected that intelligence
Hmm.
simply because they were used to working in a very safe, very stable environment and couldn't imagine a reality where that wasn't the case. There were individuals within the organization who understood that we needed to act and were willing to do so very happily. Included in those numbers were key leaders in the organization. And I can remember very clearly sort of presenting results demonstrating that we were seeing losses in a key category, and I presented the strategy to address those losses and, in fact, get in front of them. So that we would not only, prevent any further losses, mitigate any further losses is a better description, but win back the spend in this key category that had been lost to date. And I presented it to the head of this division, and there was some debate, frankly, about whether or not we should act at that point. And I remember the head of the division just saying very clearly, there's no cost and there's no risk to us doing this. But if we do nothing, then we leave our fate in someone else's hands. And that insight has really stayed with me, sort of weighing the pros and the cons very deliberately, and particularly in this case, staying the course meant significant increasing loss and perhaps ruin. And even if we could incrementally improve that, it was worth the effort. And I think it ultimately, David, it comes back to people's individual appetites for change.
Mhm.
Very often there is none. And people need to be guided through that process.
Yeah. Well, change is often hard. It sounds like you really get involved when leadership knows that they need to change, but don't know exactly how. And you can really help them build the business case, think through the data, understand how the organization is going to be impacted. But it sounds like you get involved, in organizations that maybe have that crisis, so the examples you share, or maybe when they want to go into a different place, they want to scale, they want to change, they want to accelerate their growth, and they need to figure out how. So you're making a powerful impact on a lot of organizations. So it must feel good. So that's very cool. Do you
It really
typically
does.
engage as a consultant in these situations, as a long-term engagement, or if there's short-term engagements? How do you engage typically with your clients?
When I'm developing a growth strategy for a client, that's a fairly intense process. It's very detailed. It requires a lot of engagement with the company. Not necessarily a lot of time from them, and not necessarily a lot of effort from them, but I want to be sure that I have captured that intelligence such that I am doing justice to the business case,
Mhm.
because to your point, I'm typically engaging with clients at a very significant milestone in their company's trajectory. I want to be sure that I am confident and therefore they can feel confident in my recommendations and the decisions that they're making. So I will spend the time required to collect the information and synthesize it, and apply it to create strategies and the supporting tactics. That can take anywhere between, for a smaller company, a number of weeks to about 3 months for a fairly established company. And that's from kickoff to presentation of a fully vetted strategy and implementation plan and measurement plan. Then, depending on the client's needs, I will remain engaged either as a contributor to implementation, leading implementation, or as an advisor. So that really depends on what the client has in terms of a team and resources and confidence in their ability to move things forward.
That's great. Well, it sounds like you're making a powerful impact on your clients. their employees, their customers, and that's
Thank you.
fantastic. If people want to get in
Certainly
touch
make
with you
sense.
to learn more about your services or how they could engage with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Please email. My email address is marina@hampsteadsolutions.com. MARINA at HAMPSTEADSOLUTIONS.com.
That's great. And we'll put the link in the comments and in the description.
Wonderful.
So Marina, thank you very much for taking the time for this interview. I really
It was a
appreciate
pleasure.
your
Thank
insights.
you.
Thank you again.